All right.
I'm sorry, sir, what was your name?
Dick McCaughey.
Thank you.
That's spelled MC, capital CAUGHEY.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. Good morning. Sarah will not be with us today. I'm not sure about Doug. I'm thinking that they might be working on some town board stuff.
So, when I sent Sarah mail, it came back that
She's out of the office.
on.
Yeah. So we have Karen is not a guest, but you really are a guest speaker today.
I am.
Yes. And then Matt Horn from the MRB group and the LDC as well. Some of you were on last night's meeting, which was really good, informative meeting. Yeah, you
I was not used to that.
So Karen and Matt are gonna give us an update on affordable housing, which is, we could talk about for 2 hours, and honestly,
We could.
we could.
We probably could.
We could.
Can you guys hear me with my mask on? Yes, I can.
That's a bad thing.
Okay.
Can you hear Karen, Sal, and Chuck?
Yes,
Yes,
Okay.
All right.
Oh, he
So-
gave you a thumbs up.
Since our last affordable housing meeting, we have discovered a few things. One is that our market segment actually has a higher income than we had originally thought based on 2020 figures. Is that what that is? Okay. And Matt can deal with that because I don't like dealing with figures. But at the last town board meeting, it was made very clear to us that we need to look at owner occupied affordable housing. Which, if you want to know my personal opinion, you don't.
We do.
I don't believe it. I believe we should be concentrating on the masses rather than on a few. And there are many, many people in our market area that are in need of affordable housing. So concentrating on the masses would mean concentrating on rental property. But, you know, that rental property has a different basis than owner occupied, we're finding out. So rental property actually depends very heavily on tax credits. Am I right there? And tax credits, of course, are getting handed out by HUD or the state?
The state.
The state. And it's a competitive thing. So they're at the mercy, basically, of whoever advocates for them at the state level. Owner occupied housing, we have discovered a few really interesting models, and we're at the, I can't really just, I really need Doug here to work with us, but there I was looking at models that offered a community of owner occupied and market rate housing. Okay. And when I was looking at that, I came across a Habitat for Humanity model that actually built a community. Habitat had their own land trust, and they used that as a basis for actually building owner-occupied affordable housing. And I believe it was on the outskirts. I didn't look at it too carefully, but I believe there was market rate at the on the outer outskirts of it. So we contacted Nash from Habitat for Humanity, and he actually brought up that in Tompkins County there is such a model, and they built, I believe, 12 homes on a land trust property. And he would have to explain the details of it because I don't like, I know there are details, but I can't remember them very well. I'm old, so I leave that to the young person here.
Is that the
But-
Marco model?
What?
Is that the Marco?
No, it's really an interesting model. It's, they developed a land trust. And I don't know the details, and Nash didn't either, but it's in Tompkins County. And they say the land is owned by the land trust. The Habitat for Humanity built 12 homes on that land, and then they, of course, worked with individuals on the mortgages for those homes. So I don't really understand what happens. There he is. They sell that
Great,
property,
his ears-
but
your
Doug
ears are
does. Is there something?
Sorry I'm late, everybody. I was on the phone with the town attorney. That's never a good way to start the day, so.
Hides a much.
Yes.
So here we are, I'm telling them that we've been working on owner occupied. And we spent a lot of time looking at owner occupied and looking at several different models. And there is one option, and I'm not sure that we're ready to talk about. Do you want to talk about the owner occupied
Well,
element that we've been looking at?
Yeah, the owner occupied piece is certainly challenging because it comes with a lot more aspects when you're talking about new construction, owner occupied, and trying to keep the value or the price at a price point which is deemed affordable, right? So that means there's got to be what I use the word tether. There's got to be a tether to another entity to keep the price down, because otherwise, think about, and I apologize if you already talked about this, think about the developer comes in, builds a house, and says, okay, the town wants us to make this affordable. We're going to sell this house for $100,000, pick a number out the top of the air. Mr. Smith comes along, buys the house for $100,000. The next day he turns around and sells it for $275,000. It's no longer affordable, right? So there's got to be some sort of tether. There's got to be some sort of other mechanism. So, you know, that's where there's other entities, there's other organizations. I think with the affordable housing team is very robust in that it's got a lot of connections with a lot of entities. We've had conversations with Habitat for Humanity. Matt and I started a conversation kind of with the county. I think there's a lot of other stakeholders that need to come to the table, especially for that owner occupied piece. I think that there's also a real opportunity for what I would say 55 plus affordable housing in the town of Canandaigua with some existing entities that then may also help free up some quasi-affordable. I don't know how else you say it. I mean, because, you know, if that, Matt, what's the definition for affordable, the price point that we're going after? It's income-based, I know.
Yeah, what the committee's been focused on is 50% of area median income, which is $84,000 is area median income or median household income in the town. So 50% is $42,000.
Right, and then if you go to get a mortgage for that, right, it's 30% is your loan to income, right? Your
So about $250,000.
Yeah.
Did you say 84 for a
84,000.
family,
That's pretty high.
basically? Is that for 2 income earners or 1
Median household.
household? Okay, got it. Yep.
Did you say $250,000 mortgage? I thought it was less than that. It's what's the number again? Just, I'm sorry.
84 too.
84,000 is the income.
Yes.
That's net.
84,000 is the median house.
The median, just median. Okay, median household income.
And what was the other figure?
When you
The
say net,
mortgage
that changes
Discounted.
Yeah,
to
yeah, 'cause it's-
50%.
changes the picture as well.
I mean, it's a difficult calculation because the numbers come out and you look at it and you just know it's not real life, right? So
Exactly.
at 50% of area median income, or median household income, I need to make sure I'm saying the right things. At 50% of median household income, we're talking about $40,000 a year. If you chase it out, 50% of median household income, you discount it to 67% because you're not supposed to spend more than a third of your income on housing costs. That gets you to 28,000. That is saying that a person who makes $42,000 can afford to spend $1,900 a month on a mortgage. Which just blows my mind.
That's not real life.
That's just not real life, right?
Well, that's maximum, right? That's also maximum,
Yeah.
Does that include everything? Utilities?
Yeah.
usually.
So you discount it.
So you're gonna
more.
discount it, yeah.
We played
Little
with
bit
it,
more.
to discount it a bit more, but even at what we would discount it by, which was, around 25%, you're still in the $1,500 range,
Right.
which is,
And again, you gotta subtract out heat, light, taxes.
yeah, that's what that discount was.
So
to
the
go from
the
2,000
400, okay, so that
Insurance.
500 is.
Yeah, so you're sucking down the actual payment for a mortgage to less than $1,000.
Well, don't forget, it's also that mortgage is gonna include taxes. For the bank to give you the mortgage, that income value, that ratio's gotta include your property
Thankfully,
taxes.
you're in
So,
town, okay?
yeah.
Those are virtually none.
right, but we're still in Ontario County, and we're still in the Canandaigua School District, so. So, yeah, right. So that $200,000 house, you're easily paying $3,000, $4,000 a year in property taxes, all in, right? Special districts, et cetera. So you got to back that out. So I mean, it cheats the number down. You're probably realistically, you're looking at $1,000 a month house
Yeah,
payment
that's what-
approximately,
That's what I came up with.
Yeah,
was
yeah.
A little over $1,000.
Yeah. right? So that becomes a challenge.
Yeah, especially if the housing stock would
Because
probably
there
be
is nothing.
older, that
There's no
requires
stock.
more
In
maintenance.
that rate. So there we go.
It's a tough nut.
So that's where it's going to involve, I think many other stakeholders, and we've got to have a larger conversation specifically on that home ownership piece. I mean, the town of Canandaigua can certainly lead the way, but there's got to be other people at the table with that because of the various sprawling out pieces. But then there's the rental side of it also. And Matt knows this. Matt and I were in a meeting last week and I shared this story last Tuesday. I had a couple come into the town hall. They were what I would say, let me just say 55 plus. And they currently rent an apartment at Centerpoint. They got their notification that the rent was going up $200 a month. They're on a fixed income. They're out of their apartment. They're looking for a place. They can't find a place. There's waiting lists for everything. And even at their price point, and they shared with me, and I want to be careful about disclosing too much, but I haven't said their name. They disclosed that their household income is $38,000 a year. Household income is $38,000 a year.
And of course, you all know that I have a senior group. And it's actually a small group, and 5 out of the 9 people that attend it regularly, one of them is a couple, have need for affordable housing. And the one couple is actually being kicked out of they're currently in a mobile home. And they pay $1,000 a month, and they can't really afford that. And they're being kicked out because the property has been sold. And I see them week in, week out, applying. By the time they get the application and apply, it's either gone or there's a waiting list. And so what do you do with someone like that? And fortunately, the others are already in something, but they admit the minute the rent goes up, they're going to have to find something else.
Yeah.
So, and what percentage of the population in our area is over 55?
The majority.
Yeah.
The majority.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge. And so, I know that there's a lot of comments about there's a need for more single family home ownership. And okay, that's one avenue, right? But there's multiple avenues to this affordable housing situation. There's multiple buckets, so to speak, under that umbrella that we've got to be worried about. And I think maybe one of the ones that we might as an entity be able to tackle the quickest and have the most impact on is this one, specifically rental available housing 55 plus.
Plus.
Right. And our comprehensive plan backs that demographic backs it up. I mean, we
Oh, yes.
know our population is aging. We've documented it. It's real.
And the interesting part is, I mean, you know, we've opened conversations with the county about scaling this up, right? The issues, you know, trying to deal with this as the town of Canandaigua is gonna be very difficult because of the scale is a challenge, right? And once you step outside the town of Canandaigua and look at Ontario County as a whole, the median household income goes from 85,000 to 65,000.
What was that last number?
65,000.
Difference.
And so again, so if we're over here trying to pull together, you know, affordable housing strategies at the $85,000 number, we're doing it in a silo. Because once you get outside the town of Canandaigua, you can't, you know, those folks are not gonna be able to afford it either. And so similarly, I mean, one of the things that you know, Doug and I have talked about is, you know, not exporting our affordable housing challenges elsewhere. And so if we want to be a tourism community, an agriculture community, those are not $84,000 a year jobs, right?
No, they're not.
And so you can't, on one hand, say our economic development strategy is tourism, which pays $38,000 a year, and say our housing target is to serve those who make $84,000.
Can you share your Hilton story?
Oh, that's a good one.
The Hilton had
When you,
the service
they
workers.
bring them in.
Yeah.
the bus.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
The town of Hilton Head, South Carolina, where we do a little work, they're working on an affordable housing strategy as well. As you know, Hilton Head's dominated by tourism. The major employers on Hilton Head Island are hotels and resorts and
Service people.
all service people, restaurants, you got it. Obviously you can't live on Hilton Head Island working in a hotel. And so every morning, folks get up at 4 a.m. to go to work to get to work on time in a hotel and take a bus from as far away as 100 miles to get into Hilton Head. 2 to 2.5 hour bus rides in and out. So add 5 hours to your day after you work an 8 to 10 hour day in a hotel because they've exported their affordable housing problem. They've created it and they've exported it. We're working with Greenville, South Carolina on the same problem. And Canandaigua was not there, right? But only because you can get to Geneva or Seneca County and the affordability starts to pick back up a bit. But that's still 45 minutes to go to work at a $19, $20 an hour job. An extra hour and a half a day. So
I think we have to recognize this is an old problem. When I was in seminary and doing field work, I was working in Upper Westchester County, where the available land for new housing was zoned 4 acres. And professionals couldn't work in the areas they served. Policemen, teachers, nurses could not afford to live in Upper Westchester County. They were all commuting from the city or from distances apart. And I was trying to work on open housing, knocking my head against the wall. At the same time, there was a lot of substandard housing. People said it wouldn't recognize with high rents. So this has been an issue. And what we're trying to tackle here is not something recent. It's been around a long time.
It's exacerbated now, though.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason it is because communities are focused on economic development. And Matt knows because he comes to our Ontario County Board meeting occasionally, repeatedly, month after month, the people on the Ontario County Economic Development Board sit there and listen to a business give us an opportunity to support them if they move to Ontario County. And the number one thing they ask for is affordable housing and transportation for their workforce. And I hate to mention a community, but typically their best bet is to move into Victor. And why? Because Victor's on the fringe and has the capability of a 15-20 minute bus ride to affordable housing in the city of Rochester, which has more owner occupied affordability than in Ontario County. And when I worked for New Energy Works, and we all know this, but Dick Snook, I repeatedly, when we had someone come in who back then made $12 an hour, which, you know, really, you could barely live on that. I send them to Wayne County. I tell them, you know, go to Wayne County, look in Wayne County. Because, and that was when we were in Shortsville, and there is some affordability in Shortsville. But not for, and, you know, I believe that people have the wrong opinion of the people who need affordable housing. They're not derelicts, and they're not homeless people who are living in tents by Lagoon Park or wherever. These are people who are working one woman who works 3 jobs to support her 3 children. These are the people that we're looking for to provide affordability for people who are working their tails off just to make ends meet.
Now, you started the meeting by talking about a preference for owner occupied. I sense that was from the town board. And the objection to rental is what?
You tell them, Doug.
You know, I think that there's some voices on the town board that would like to continue to encourage owner occupied so that they're building value, that they're building equity to help them not only have a place to live, but also to help them in their economic situation in life, right? To continue to build that equity and that investment. And like I said, I think that's absolutely something that we should be talking about, but I don't think that's the only thing that we can talk about, because if that's the only thing that we're talking about, we're gonna miss a dire need that's immediate.
Right.
And as a result, we're going to miss development opportunities for the town, the city, the county, because we're not going to have the service staff that these tourism-based businesses need. And we're not even going to have the staff that manufacturers need, manufacturers who have lines. We're not gonna be able to staff those lines. We're even Pactiv. Pactiv is one of the businesses that is crying for affordable housing and affordable transportation. You know,
The other thing I'll just throw out here real quick as we're talking about this, whether it's rental or affordable or ownership models for affordable housing, you know, we thought that our uptown area could lend itself to affordable housing with the density and everything. And what we're seeing is, yes, there are projects moving forward. Can we talk about Edgemere? Is that applied yet?
No.
Okay. Well, there's a concept of a development apartment
There's
building
two concept apartment complexes.
that is coming, and one in particular is specifically 100% focused on the affordable housing market. So when that one comes online, you know, that's 25. Now, think about building an entire apartment building. You're 18 months plus before that, you know, you cut the ribbon on the building, right? So that's 25 units. Okay, that's a start. But when we have that's small, right? And when we have waiting lists of hundreds, right? That there's an immediate problem. But the other thing that we've discovered is, with everything that we've done in, as Matt said last night, clearing the regulatory hurdles with Uptown, well, the price of land has shot way up, and it becomes more challenging to make that affordable. So we may have to go back and either look at the regulations for the form-based code, or we may have to look at other areas of the town. We have our other 2 MUOs, mixed use overlays, that we might want to target specific affordable housing zoning
Yes.
for those, you know.
Also, I keep getting questions, or statements, well, I've had this twice now. Not interested in doing affordable housing. So it's an education, I think, it's a, to the developers. and-
Marketing.
Absolutely, with a package, well, you know what, here are your options. This is what the town, these are, you could do this and this and this, and I just think there's opportunities there too.
But at the heart of the issue, at least at the town level, is gonna continue to be this muddy,
Exactly.
Yes,
what's the
what
target?
is it? Yeah,
What's the target, right? And so, I mean, the CIC and the Affordable Housing Task Force can, I think it was the Chancellor of SUNY a couple of years ago started speaking. She said, we get good in academia, they get good at admiring the problem. Like they walk around it and kick it, and let's, what do we think?
really good.
And we're gonna be admiring the problem until we drive a stake in the ground and define it, because on our team, we're talking about, because this is a conversation that's happening everywhere, as you know, and virtually any community I go into, their number one priority right now is housing. And we've reinforced housing is economic development. That's, so anybody who says my number one priority is economic development, I usually talk them into housing, because you can't get economic development without housing. And the number one thing we tell them is define it, because we were talking about, particularly on our team, on the MRB team, in the case of town of Canandaigua, we thought about this hackathon concept where we could bring in some experts from around the region anyway and say, okay, here's a piece of property. All right, here's a 20-acre piece of property that's zoned for, that's zoned however it's zoned, right? How do we get, and Pactive, I just ran the number again. I flipped the numbers before, that's why they came out higher. But at Pactive, that line production worker makes $25 an hour. $25 an hour is about $52,000 a year. If you cheat it all down, the way Tom was just describing, by the time you cheat it all down, that's still about $1,000 a month that they can spend on a mortgage. Let's go to work. How do we take this 20 acres and create 50 units that will be supported by $1,000 a month mortgage, and literally unpack this problem from blades of grass out to certificates of occupancy, right? And we thought about doing that. We thought about bringing a bunch of people in, but if the community's not united in what they're looking for, then that exercise is fun. It would be fun for me anyway. It's fun, but it's not super productive and it's not valuable to you if everybody's not on board. Now that particular exercise is an example of what the town board would be interested in, presuming we could chase out an actual number.
And so much of it is layered too, right? So Matt talks about the affordable housing piece, and then you get into the spider web of what that is. But think about it as you're going up a ladder, right? So affordable housing may be the third rung of the ladder, and maybe the first rung of the ladder, as you're walking up the step ladder, the first step is acquiring the land. Well, there's a big second step, and Pat and Chuck know this in particular, and that big second step is the infrastructure. Is the infrastructure there to support it? Honestly, it's not. The infrastructure is not there currently in the town of Canandaigua. The infrastructure is not there in Ontario County currently to support it. And that's a big, huge second step that we've got to get past to get to that third step.
Not in aggregate, right? I mean, that's a great point. To do this on a pixelated level where we say, we're going to create 50 units or 20 units that sell for $50,000 a piece or whatever the number is. That's cool. But that's the last 50 units you're going to put on, right? Because we don't have the water to support it, or at least not the conveyances to get the water there. So, yeah, those have to be, you have to put one foot in front of the other.
You mentioned MUOs, and in the perfect planning process, those were our growth needs. But look what happened to MUO 3 when somebody proposed housing.
Mhm.
Everybody's up in arms because of, they come up with all the reasons, but, and the one adjacent to Farmington, I'm afraid we have the same problem up there. Because we've got all the fancy people just over the line and say, hell no, we don't want apartments in our community. And you look at Hilton Head, Bluffton was the service community, and now you've got Del Webb that has squeezed out all the affordable housing in Bluffton outside of Hilton Head. It's
pushing its way west, but every time it happens, then the next community goes up by 20%.
There's so many aspects, and to your point, Tom, I remember when we did the first phase of Creekview and we were working on that, I got so many phone calls from people in both Canandaigua and Hopewell opposed to Creekview. And so there's the public relations piece, but there's also another, let's use Creekview as another example here for a quick second. There's 4 phases to that. 3 of those are affordable housing. 1 is market rate, right? So the developer's ready to go. They have their approvals from the planning board. Everything is all set. They need the financing to make it happen, the tax credits with the state, right? So Matt, 2 weeks ago, put on the best conference I've been on in 3 years. It's the only one I've been at in 3 years, Matt, but anyways, but no, it was really, really good. No, it was super, super good. It was super helpful. And Matt brought in Charlie Fillion from Albany from CDBG. But that's one of the issues that we have is we've got, okay, that project is competing with Happiness House in the town of Canandaigua, is competing with Edgemere, is competing with Uptown Landing, is competing with, I'm missing one, there's one more just in the town of Canandaigua for that same pot of money, right? Everybody's competing and I'm only talking about the projects in the town of Canandaigua. Extrapolate that now to Ontario County and the Finger Lakes region and everything. And so you run into that. And then the other thing is that we've seen, and we saw it with Cheshire also, is the caps on the grants are still at a old level where the price of pipe is going up 4 times of what it was. And so it becomes more and more challenging. So when you really start to, unpack this, there's a lot of aspects relative to affordable housing that you got to get down into. But the Creekview one is a perfect example of that's already approved. It's there. We could bring 202 more 96 unit phases online. The developer's ready to go. All the approvals are in place. We could add 180 or 92 additional units tomorrow.
and expenses keep accelerating.
Yes.
192 units. One of the questions Karen's been asking, I think Doug's getting to the number, but what's the current waiting list around the community? It's in the hundreds, right?
I think it's over 200.
So that gets, that 190 plus gets us back to 0, right? Gets us back to stable. And then we can worry about the next one. But that's a great example of, all right, let's crack the finance. They got one problem, finance. Let's go crack the finance. That's a big problem.
Right.
Put the right eyes on it, make it happen.
I go back to a question that I posed to you, Doug, a while back. Any way of breaking the strings to some of the outhouse property so a developer can get the land for free?
You mean the open space that the town owns?
Yeah. Or is that
I don't
that
know.
would crack the nut of the cost of land if the town
It's still,
designated that as some kind of residential option.
okay,
Got
so
utilities there.
hypothetically, let's just say, for instance, we can't, but let's just say we could. Let's say on that ladder, we're gonna take away this first step. We're gonna give the property to the LDC so that the LDC can do it, right? Probably have $5-8 million worth of utilities that have got to go in the ground because there's nothing there. At least, if not more. There is literally nothing there. The sewer is at Happiness House and it comes down through Outhouse Park and goes off the other side. And I don't even know it has the capacity to be able to handle that. You're gonna have to fix all that all the way back up through there. Plus you'll have to run water. There's no water there. I'm not sure if that'd be Canandaigua Farmington or Canandaigua Consolidated. It would depend on the grade and where you could tie in. Plus, you're gonna have to figure out something with the gas that come in.
Again, that's the problem with all developments, but the cost of the raw land would still be free.
But it's still,
But it's still
you're gonna do an
still
affordable
got-
housing
still got
project and
research.
tack on 10
Okay.
million. It's not
How about
affordable
the
anymore.
lot at the corner of Brickyard and your piece? Isn't that got utilities already in?
The apartments,
Yeah,
they're getting ready to move forward, right?
we've been
Center
hearing that
Point.
for 20 years. So
No, but didn't they just make
They
application?
made application for phase 4.
Mhm.
Yep, and they paused it, but we have the plans, they're just coming, they've been tabled.
But that one, yes, the utilities are in the ground, it's
Yeah.
ready to go.
But yeah, they have everything they need to move forward.
It's been there for how long? I guess I'm looking for low hanging fruit, but maybe there isn't any.
Well, that's why truthfully, I go back to Creekview. Utilities are there. They already spent $750,000 putting in a pump station and that was all done by DeMarco to be able to handle all the phases, you know, there's, but then, it's where sometimes I get so frustrated with the county, but then I find out that there's a problem with a sewer line on Lakeshore Drive that has an I&I problem. Getting into the weeds here, but that now is may hold that up and that they've got to do that. You know, it's I go back to infrastructure. Everybody's tired of hearing me talk about infrastructure, but there's a problem with infrastructure.
Well, that also, I mean, if you think about the back to scale, for me, it goes back to scale, right? So there are sites in Ontario County that are ready to go right now, right? So if there was a countywide strategy that says, okay, we're gonna focus on, I'll just pick a site out of the sky, we're gonna focus in Manchester. Because we've got acreage, we've got sewer capacity, water capacity, access to the throughway, you're on and off. That's what we're gonna focus. We can do that right now. And we're gonna make infrastructure investments in Canada. So that the next domino that falls is Canada, right? Because if you wait on the infrastructure in Canandaigua, the problem's gonna get worse. Over the next, the market deficit is gonna continue to grow. And you do have one of these, 100 acre or 100 lot or 100 unit developments. And instead of getting you back to ground zero by developing 200 units, it gets you to a 200 unit deficit by developing 200 units and we wait. So elsewhere in the county can absorb that current deficit and buy us time to come into Canandaigua and invest in the infrastructure that needs to happen. But that takes a countywide strategy. And I don't
It
hear
also
the
takes an
county
analysis to understand what is really available, because when we talk about the water problem, right? That also, water comes to Manchester, comes from the same exact line that we're having problems with in Uptown.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, you need a full assessment, what's ready today and what needs to happen on the next domino. To do that.
But that needs to be on the countywide
Exactly.
level.
Yep, exactly.
So you approached Chris DeVoe,
Matt and I had a meeting, yes, very productive meeting.
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
And of course, Tom Harvey should probably be brought in on that, or is he?
So I think Chris is looking at what members of his team to make the most sense, because at the end of the day, the county also has to define what the problem is, right? They have to define not the problem, we know what the problem is. They have to define what piece of the problem they're gonna go after. And so Tom probably makes sense across the board. And then are there others, ESS or veterans or whomever else that gets touched by this problem? And then,
So does this need to go to the board of supervisors?
well, what we've asked Chris is to think about what resources he could apply, and by that we mean staffing for now, what staff resources he could throw together. So he's gonna come back to us with that.
Randy brought up stuff that we don't even think about. As I understand, I think I've heard this from Chris Jensen, is that codes are gonna make new builds all electric, or virtually all electric. Does the grid have the capacity for the plug-in vehicles, much less all of the new builds going all electric? And is that anything we have to control? Who the hell controls the size of the like electric pipes that come in here. Anybody understand that?
It's a challenge, right? You've got, you gotta, well, you've obviously with our two primary utility providers are NICEAG and RG&E, right? Ibersolar, right? Is this still?
I would roll in.
And so it's definitely a need. Matt told a story last night about what the wind turbines and the grid. So
I had never heard that. I often
That was
wondered.
good.
Yeah, why is
Yeah,
it so
makes
windy
sense.
and nothing's happening? And so even these off-grid projects, like we've been talking to Ryan Wallace about coming off, about doing sustainable energy housing. He still needs to plug into the grid. Geneva, the issue he ran up against was, to Doug's point, I mean, he got to this affordable nut, and then NICEAG was like, well, and we need $1 million to upgrade the connection and get you back on the line. And you know, he didn't have it. So I think that's another, and I want to track down Mark Peterson. For some reason, I think he's back in the region, Mark, because he had an interesting assessment a bunch of years ago. He was the executive director of GRE, Greater Rochester Enterprise. And he was talking about when Iberdrola acquired NICEAG and RG&E, the state required that they handle the accounting of deferred maintenance in a certain way that basically wiped out their first 10 years of any major capital improvement opportunity. And that's been about 10 years now. So my hope is that Iberdrola would be in a position now to swing back around, start reinforcing this grid, but without that, right, you can't even approach solar development because it can't connect back to the grid.
you guys picked a difficult
Yeah,
topic.
On the positive side, though, I'll leave it with some positives. One, we didn't get kicked out of the county administrator's office.
That's good.
And not just we didn't get kicked out, he knows it's a problem. He recognizes that the county has to be involved, and he wants to think about a way to get that. So that's huge. Two, you got the town and the city around the table thinking about this as well. And
Is the city receptive?
I think they will be. I mean, they were absolutely receptive to some of the infrastructure conversations we're talking about, which will go a long way. I mean, that was a big topic last night. So I think they're 100% behind that effort, and they hear the other things that it ties to. So that's a positive. And three, I think we've got some willing investors. I mean, you got people, Sean and Doug just laid out 3 or 4 developments that, but for us solving some of these critical issues, they're moving forward. You know, I had to drive my son to school this morning, and he asked me what, he's a middle schooler, and he was like, what are you gonna do today? What's your job today? And you know, I started talking to him about communities that we'll be visiting later on today, and who do not have investors interested in making this happen there, who are not a 15-minute ride from downtown Rochester, who do not have the cooperation of the village in town or city in town. And so Canandaigua's got a lot of assets right now as it relates to mobilize behind this issue. So we just got to stop admiring the problem, either define it at the local level or scale it up with the county and help them define it at the county level and start moving.
Well said.
I think that was very well put on it. Canandaigua, from what I've been gleaning from our meetings, has a lot of assets. I mean, you have a waiting list, and I'm looking at it on the positive side of it. If you get developers, if these prices ever come down on what they can afford to build with, we might be able to move ahead. I'm sure, Pat, you must experience this all the time with the building that you're doing, and it's tough. It's a tough situation. And what's our priority? What's our number one? Or is it 1 and 2? I don't know.
I think our priority is primarily education. I think we need to figure out a way to market it, and we can't market it like, brochures or stuff like that. It's gonna require a lot of, I don't know, talk.
Yes.
And to your point, helping folks understand who exactly these people are. I mean, these are the people who are working in the pieces of our economy that are critical.
Mhm.
And without it, I mean, the other story about Hilton Head, Tom rang my bell when he mentioned Bluffton. Now the problem with Hilton Head is there's one, well, it's always been a problem. There's one way on and one way off the
Yeah,
island.
right.
And there's really one way to Hilton Head from I-95. It's about a 30-mile trip from I-95 into Hilton Head. One road, US 278. And locals know when not to go on US 78, when to just stay home and let it die down. When I raised Uptown as a priority with a regional decision maker, and they were like, wow, how much more can 332 hit? Can 332 and the intersections there with the city, is all that good, prepped, ready to go? And we said, we have a plan. We have a plan. And so it's, I think you're right, 100% right. Educating folks about who this market really is.
Yeah.
Educating them about why investing in other things that aren't stick-built homes right now, that investing in road and broadband and electric and water and sewer means affordable housing. We have to be able to show them the stack. It means affordable housing, it means economic development. I would say your two priorities, to Sal's question, are public education, including leadership education, right? The key decision makers, and infrastructure.
Are accessory dwelling units off the table?
Well, so are you referring to the governor's proposal that was in the budget? Yeah, so it's my understanding she's pulled that. It's also my understanding that she might be bringing that back at a later time and wants to have additional conversations relative to that. Is it an option? Yes, but the local municipalities have either got to go
That's
forward.
my question. Would local regulations supersede that? Because we've got a lot of NIMBYs and.
Well,
selfish
so,
people.
well, that's what I believe that why the governor proposed what she proposed, that, the state law was going to trump and take away that ability from home rule, and it was going to allow that. However, what I heard through my sources at the state level and through the Planning Federation, there were any number of lawsuits that were lined up to spend years in court fighting that. So that's to be determined.
A lot of selfish citizens.
To be determined. But honestly though, there are things that we could do. We've talked about the public awareness and education piece. I mean, that is absolutely fundamental to get to that point and talk about that. But there's also things the town of Canandaigua could be doing relative to zoning, relative to size of houses, relative, I talked with an entity, an organization here in the town that is very interested in doing something more cottage style relative to that 55 plus. However, it would require some zoning changes. It would also require some changes to our current code relative to the size of units of houses, so there are some things where we need to even look at ourselves also.
Again, we've been talking about that for 10 years.
Yep.
It's time to stop talking. So on the county level, yes, perhaps, I know how some people think about economic development on the county level, particularly the IDA. But my board and the IDA are both willing to get into talking about the affordable housing issue. Is there something we could do to push it to a county level by involving these two boards?
I mean, I think what's got to happen first is an assessment, right? That's step one. What do we have? What are our assets in the county, and what are our opportunities in the county? And that's gonna require funding. So I would say, you know, if the IDA and EDC communicated to the county administrator that we have resources and we're willing to support the county on that, it'd be a no-brainer for him to move forward with assessment like that.
And I'll just piggyback on that, that I 100% agree with Matt, that's step one. My guess is one of the outcomes of that assessment is you're going to find there's a need for infrastructure, and what better investment for economic development than an infrastructure, because that's going to spur not only affordable housing, that's going to spur economic development in terms of the traditional business and the industry and all of those other things. But that assessment you need, you got to know what's there.
And we gotta find this, to Doug's point, the challenge is, so what Governor Hochul's working on, right, with the electric. She's very focused on one side of the equation without considering the other side of the equation. Is the grid ready? Doug and I talked last night. If we were running the world, we would say, we're gonna benchmark NYSEG and or the providers. We're gonna benchmark the maintainers of the grid. And as the maintainers of the grid come up, we're gonna identify classes of users that now are required. So I think the statement now is anything under 7 stories, which is everything outside of Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, and downstate, right? We might need to rein that in a bit and say, all right, so for the time being, anything in this class of users all has to be electric. And as the grid improves, we're going to move to the next class, and as the grid improves, we'll continue. And we're going to find a funding mechanism that enables Iberdrola and others to reinforce the grid. Similarly here, investing in infrastructure and doing something to make sure that the affordable housing need is what's addressed, because cheap infrastructure to developable land results in market rate housing development, right? And so that's just nature. That's not good or bad. That's just the way that the Adam Smith worked it, right? So we have to find a way to tamp down that piece of the market and say, we're going to put infrastructure to this site, and we're going to do an affordable housing overlay that says if you want, you know, any kind of density on this property, 51% of it.
Would you be willing to, well, I'm missing my board meeting this morning, it's usually the second, but and they're talking about updates on the new economic developer. Anyway, would you be interested in going with me and talking to Sue Mary about putting together a presentation for the 2 boards?
Absolutely.
Very good. Doug, do you want to be involved in that?
It's up to you guys. But just to
Because,
piggyback,
you know, if anyone knows if there's money available, they're pretty astute in determining whether there's money available outside of the area, or grant opportunities, or, you know, using economic development. I wholeheartedly agree that certainly that's a good use of economic development of funds, because without infrastructure, you can't have it.
and the need is there, the level of detail that we really need to know would benefit the affordable housing piece, but also general economic development, you know. And we had an LDC meeting last night, Matt mentioned it, but it's so true. We get these notifications. I get them multiple times a week, so does Matt, about we have this project, but we need to know how many megawatts of electricity can your site provide? How many cubic feet of gas? How many PSI is your water line able to provide? And then what size sewer line is it? What's the capacity? Oh, by the way, if you have internet, what are the levels of internet that you can provide? And we don't have that level of detail.
Yeah.
You go back to that needs analysis, that assessment currently of what we have and what we don't have. But if we had that information, we could compete. I mean, even think of attracting developers. If we could say, hey, this site, we can provide you 10 megawatts or whatever, you know, and just that lay out that level of detail, that's a game changer.
Mhm.
And
For the county, I mean, the
Yeah, right.
county economic development, to have that repository of data.
And you know, when you think of economic development, you think of infrastructure, it's absent, so. You know, I will talk to Sue and we'll see if we can put this on the table for that.
Sure.
I have to excuse myself, I have a 10 o'clock.
You what?
I need to go to a 10 o'clock meeting. Are we gonna,
Well,
do we
that's
wanna
poor
wrap up?
planning.
I know. Well, it's the chairman of the ZBA, I don't wanna leave him waiting. Next meeting is tree team, Parks and Rec update. April 5th.
I'll work on this.
Can I toss out a question? When we
Excuse me.
started out talking about the area median household income. It's got to be distorted by the fact that in our community, we've got
So we'll bring that up.
major earners, which distorts the true picture of affordability even worse. And I don't know how the hell we change that, because higher ups look at statistics and not the true numbers behind it. Is there any way of beating that? Because I'm sure that'll disadvantage us compared with Clifton Springs or whatever.
It does, it makes us, but it also, I think, works to our advantage, and let me tell you why I say that, because it makes us think outside the box and get creative, and we have to work harder, and Cheshire's a perfect example of that. Town of Canandaigua doesn't qualify for CDBG money because we have too big of a population and our income level's too high. Okay, now we gotta roll up our sleeves, we gotta go out, we gotta put on our boots, we gotta go out, we gotta do an income survey, right? And guess what? We qualified. Now, there were other reasons we weren't able to do that, but we also had to do the same thing, and we did it successfully with the Purdy Mobile Road. So yes, it makes us reevaluate the problem, but we have the resources to be able to dig into that. Yeah.
Because on its surface, it's really the disability.
Now, there may be some programs that we just might not qualify because the numbers skewed, right? We get creative, but we have the resources to get creative. And honestly, if we didn't have the resources to be creative, then we'd have a whole different problem. So in some ways, it's a good thing.
You know, it might be an opportunity to involve Wayne County also.
Yeah. You know, Thomas is on city council.
Yeah,
that he works at,
he's one I was thinking of, yeah.
And he's very interested in this issue. He's actually working on some affordable housing projects, analysis projects up there.
Yeah.
So he'd be worth talking
Yeah,
about.
I want one of their panel discussions. So does this mean that infrastructure will no longer involve putting gas lines in? I'll have to tell you, I've lived in an all electric house for the past 50-some years, 52 years. And I wouldn't trade electric for anything. You're not agreeing with me.
Me?
No,
I got no beef with it at all. I think it's completely achievable and fair. It's just that how you get there, right?
You get there exactly the same way that we're getting there now, where back in the 1970s, there was a moratorium on oil heat, there was no natural gas, propane.
Randy Farnsworth
What was left? There
Randy
was
Farnsworth
electric.
was talking about that last night, and even then, he was talking about Christmases, or at least one Christmas, he said, when it was un-American to light your Christmas tree.
Yeah, right.
Like you weren't supposed to turn on your Christmas lights because it would sound.
I remember when they shut down 2 of the schools and combined them, because I worked at the elementary school and they moved us over to the junior academy for 6 months.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the economic development conversations have to catch up too. I remember working with John Hicks out in Seneca Castle. And there was a prospect that was kind of floating around, and one of the pieces of property that looked like it would make sense was John's. And they wouldn't even talk to him because there's no natural gas there. So it's not what, rural places have been working on all electric for as long as anybody can remember.
Well, when I moved to Laura Lane, it was rural, but when you moved there was natural gas. I just never looked in because I happen to like my all electric house. So.
But I mean, in terms of the CIC, I mean, the
Keeps my
affordable
assessment
housing,
down.
yeah,
I see that it keeps my assessment down.
the affordable housing team is really progressing, but they're really starting as they're digging into this, they're finding that there's a lot more to it.
Well, I never thought for a minute that we could come up with a resolution for affordable housing. I believe it is education and marketing, and it's at this point it's got to be kind of grassroots type of thing, just getting more and more people on our side. And I frankly think the get myself to say the nonprofits are not doing what they should be to produce more support for their missions. I really believe that they are not as they should be out there pounding the pavement and
something we haven't gotten to with affordable home ownership is making sure that we're coaching people and helping people understand the total responsibility of home ownership.
exactly
Right.
Yes.
I'm fortunate to be married to someone who understands that because I discount all of it, and I'm always blown away that toilets fail and that roofs need to be replaced. What? I feel like we just replaced that roof 20 years ago. Like, I can't believe I got to do that again. But you look at communities where housing is failing, and in a lot of cases, it's because we put someone in really an untenable situation.
And that is really the job of some of these nonprofits,
exactly.
and that's why they really need to be more intimately involved in whatever we're doing. Pathstone for years has had a program where they do classes for potential homeowners and provide grants for down payments and subsidies of some sort. But you know what? Very few people have ever heard of Pathstone. Very few. If they know of Habitat, if they think of Habitat as grabbing some homeless person off the street and saying, we're going to build you a house and you can live in there with your family. That's how they think of Habitat.
Yeah, but one of the things that I was, talking with Doug about a couple weeks ago, the Habitat homes in Geneva, there are 5 of them.
Mm-hmm.
They're all on the same street.
Mm-hmm.
They all look exactly the same down to paint color. And they're located immediately adjacent to the federally subsidized housing project, right? That wasn't the intent, right? The intent was, we're creating neighborhoods, we're creating we're creating socioeconomic diversity. And so, you're right. I mean, it's also about making sure that our nonprofit partners are aligned with now that happened to be the piece of property that was available, and that's the amount of housing they can afford, but to your point, I think let's refocus our efforts so that our resources can go farther to the right thing.
I apologize, you're gonna have somebody waiting for me upstairs, so I can run, but.
Okay. Well, I guess the CIC
That's
is
your
over.
life. Every
We lost our
minute of your
leaders.
day, there's somebody waiting for you.
Yes.
I don't miss it.
I'll be in touch, man.
Thank you. Anytime. Thank you all.
Matt, thanks a lot.
Yeah, great to see you.
Yep, thanks for being here, Sal.
See you guys later.